So my research has primarily been on groups and organizations that work in distributed settings. So it's primarily we're looking at distributed work, and this has been done in the construction industry, but also in high-tech industries, utility industry, for example. And in this particular project, we've looked at a large infrastructural project in the Netherlands, where the different construction sites were separated over 160 kilometers. This distance had quite a bit of complications and implications for how people communicate over these distances.
What are the greatest challenges of communicating over such a distance?
The greatest challenge is especially the awareness of the local conditions, that it's very difficult to really see what is going on at different sites. And this visibility, but also awareness of what is happening, is one of the greatest challenges. One other aspect we found was that there are local cultural differences, which are not always shown very carefully and which are not always discussed, but which have an implication on how people communicate and how people work together. And we also saw this back in different types of expectations on the different sites. So when you looked, for example, at the central office, they had very different expectations than parts of the regional sites within these teams. So we looked at, for example, mismatches in expectations, and can they sometimes they lead to different conflicts, which have quite big implications for how people work together. And then lastly, we looked at how do you share knowledge over these distributed sites. So how can you learn from each other? How can you learn from what's happening on the different sites? And how can you influence that knowledge? How can you improve that so that people who are working in distributed sites can really learn from each other and can really understand what they're doing actually.
What was the most efficient way of sharing knowledge?
The most efficient way, and especially in this project, but most projects, is actually sitting next to each other and face-to-face talking to each other and really explaining a lot of experiences and all the insights that people have. So especially when you talk about knowledge, it's very difficult in construction, but in many other types of projects as well, to really explain what you're doing. And you can put only a part of that in a document or in a review document, but many of the large amount of the knowledge is actually based on your own experience, your own insights, your own ideas which are coming into. And those kind of experiences and that kind of knowledge is often very difficult to share when you're not situated on the same parameter or not situated close to each other. So that was something we noticed there as well.
Apart from that, when the project had to communicate over distance virtually, what was the most efficient way?
Most efficient way, and not in this particular project, but because at that time video conference was not that popular. But when you look at current projects, especially when you look at people who are located in different regions or in different countries, for example, then the video conference is one of the easiest way to communicate, especially when you don't know each other. So one of the factors that plays a role is if people have worked together with each other before, if they really know each other, if they've met personally before. And if they have met each other before, it's much more easier to communicate, even over email or over the telephone. If they haven't met each other before, then it is very important to get some kind of insight in how this person looks like, and especially when you look at nonverbal aspects. How do they respond to certain questions? How do they respond to when you take up a problem? Are they really understanding what you're talking about? And that nonverbal aspect is missing usually in email communication or telephone communication. Look at very complex projects and complex tasks when people are very dependent on each other. It is quite important that you do have a clear and common understanding on what you're working with. So it's building up a trusting relationship that you really are able to trust each other, to understand what the other person is saying. One of the main things is first meet each other face to face. It's a very important aspect that you know each other, that you know who you're working with, and that you have a common ground, that you have a common expectation, for example, of what you expect of the other person and how can you communicate. So one of the things usually is very important is that you lay a certain ground rules on how do you communicate, how often do you communicate, in what kind of means is the most suitable way to communicate, for example. What kind of technology will you be using? And will you be using the technology? Because that's often the other case, when sometimes you put in a system or an email system in order to communicate with each other, and not all parties are using that. So it has to be a policy which is developed by the whole group or the whole team together. And then secondly, is trying to keep up very regular meetings in order to not only share documentation, but really try to explain to each other and really tell a story, what has been happening, what have you done, and also try the behind-lying aspects of why did you come to this particular decision, what kind of factors were part of that decision.
Does this count for just the construction business?
No, this is a problem that is very common in many kinds of industries. So it's not only in the construction industry, but especially companies who are working over country boundaries, for example, are facing these problems working within a distributed environment, crossing different cultures and crossing different languages.